The waves shimmered like liquid glass beneath the golden sunset as the luxury yacht Elysium prepared to depart. Its purpose seemed innocent, a romantic voyage to a private island where a billionaire planned a lavish gala. But to one woman on board, it was supposed to be the beginning of forgiveness. To another man, it was meant to be her grave. Evelyn Cross stood at the edge of the deck, one hand resting on her 6-month pregnant belly, the other clutching a delicate necklace shaped like a teardrop of blue crystal. The wind tangled her hair as she looked toward the horizon, believing this trip was her husband's way of making peace after months of distance and cold silence. Richard had promised, "We'll start over on the island, Evie. Just you and me." She wanted to believe him. Even after catching glimpses of messages between him and a woman named Lila, the woman who now hosted the gala on the island, Evelyn convinced herself it was work, not betrayal. Love makes fools of the hopeful, and tonight she was the biggest fool of all. The yacht's captain appeared from below deck, tall, broad-shouldered, with weathered hands and eyes that carried too many storms. His name was Marco Bellini, or at least that's what he had told her. Richard said Marco was the best man to trust on the sea. Evelyn smiled politely and offered him tea she had brought, but he only nodded. There was something unsettling in the way he studied her, as if she reminded him of a dream he couldn't place. As the engines rumbled to life, Marco received a single encrypted message on his satellite phone. "Make it look like an accident, before dawn." He slipped the phone into his pocket and looked up. Evelyn was adjusting her necklace, the gem glinting like a drop of the ocean itself. For a second, his breath caught. That necklace? He had seen it before. Not on her, but around the neck of a woman in an old photograph. His mother, holding a little girl he'd lost in a fire decades ago. Marco's pulse hammered. No, it couldn't be. The world was too cruel for such coincidence, but as Evelyn turned and smiled softly, thanking him for steering her safely, something inside him cracked open. He wasn't looking at a target anymore. He was looking at blood, family, life he'd thought the sea had taken long ago. The horizon darkened. The island lights flickered in the distance like waiting devils. Beneath the deck, a timer was already ticking, set to ignite the fuel lines within hours. And only Marco knew what was supposed to happen when they reached open water. "Before dawn," he whispered, staring at Evelyn's necklace glinting under the moonlight. Or before the truth. The letter had arrived in a white silk envelope sealed with gold wax, a personal invitation from Richard himself. "For my beautiful wife, Evelyn," it read in his familiar looping handwriting. "A private gala on our island, just you and me. Let's start over, for the baby's sake." Those words had undone her. For months, Evelyn had lived in a silence that hurt more than shouting ever could. Richard's eyes no longer softened when he looked at her. The gentle hand on her shoulder had turned into a cold pat, a routine gesture of obligation. But that letter, those few lines, brought a spark of hope. Maybe he missed her. Maybe the distance was only fear of fatherhood, not betrayal. Now, sitting in the cabin of the yacht Elysium, she replayed those thoughts like a prayer. The sea outside was smooth, unnervingly calm. She glanced at the clock, 7:45 p.m., and wondered if Richard was already waiting on the island, setting the table, choosing the music she loved. In her imagination, he was smiling again, the way he used to before money had hardened him. Down below, Marco adjusted the ship's controls, his expression unreadable. Every flicker of the radar reminded him of the ticking clock inside his chest. He had seen too much blood in his life, too many contracts, too many faces erased from the world. But tonight was different. The woman he was meant to kill wasn't just another job. She was a living fragment of a life he thought had burned away decades ago. He remembered the night of the fire. The screams, the smell of smoke, the small hand that slipped from his. He had searched for years before the streets hardened him, before the underworld claimed him. He'd built his empire of fear and loyalty, but it had never filled that hollow space called family. And now she was standing right there. His sister. Pregnant. Innocent. Talking about hope. "Marco?" Evelyn's soft voice broke through his thoughts. She had come down to bring him coffee. "You've been quiet this whole trip. You must do this often. These long, lonely nights at sea." He turned to face her, forcing a faint smile. "Sometimes the sea keeps secrets better than people do," he said. She laughed gently, misunderstanding. Then I suppose my husband chose the right captain. He said you were discreet. I'm grateful. He wants everything to be perfect tonight. Her words struck like a blade. Perfect. That's what Richard had called it too. The perfect ending. The plan was simple. When the yacht reached open water, the explosion would erase both woman and child. Richard would arrive at the gala an hour later, grieving, surrounded by sympathy and champagne. Insurance money, inheritance, freedom. Marco's gaze fell to the small silver case at his side, the detonator. One press, and the engine room would erupt. One press, and he'd lose his last chance at redemption. Evelyn moved closer, setting the coffee beside him. My mother used to say the ocean knows everything, she said softly. That's why I study it. It remembers. The words sank into him like stones. Maybe the ocean did remember. Maybe it had brought her back for him to choose differently this time. Above deck, lightning flashed far away on the horizon, a storm forming out of sight. The island's distant lights flickered like a false promise. Marco stared at the timer. 40 minutes left. He closed his eyes. Not this time, he whispered. The night air had turned heavy, the kind that tasted like rain long before the clouds began to break. Evelyn stepped out onto the deck, barefoot, her silk dress rippling in the wind. The yacht sliced through the water with an almost eerie grace. Behind her, the horizon was nothing but black. No shore, no sound except the low hum of the engine and the distant rumble of thunder. She wrapped her arms around herself. It's strange, she murmured to no one in particular. It feels too quiet. Marco's voice came from the shadows near the wheel. The sea's like a woman, he said, eyes on the radar. When she's too quiet, it means she's thinking of something dangerous. Evelyn smiled faintly, unaware that he wasn't talking about the ocean at all. You sound like a poet, Captain. Maybe once, he said, his tone rough. Before I learned poetry doesn't keep you alive. She laughed, the sound small and genuine. It was the kind of laugh that used to echo through the small house of his childhood, the one with the chipped blue door and the smell of salt in the curtains. He hadn't thought about that house in 20 years. He hadn't allowed himself to. But tonight, memories crept in like a tide he couldn't fight. From the cabin below, a faint beep echoed. The countdown timer hidden behind a panel near the fuel tank. 30 minutes. Marco's hands clenched around the wheel. Evelyn moved closer. Will the storm catch us? Maybe, he said, but storms don't scare me. She looked at him then, really looked. The scar running from his temple to his jaw. The tired eyes of a man who'd seen too much. You've been through worse, she gasped. Lightning flickered again, illuminating the sea in shards of silver. For a second, her necklace glowed, a blue spark against her skin. Marco froze. The memory slammed into him, his mother on her knees, fastening that same stone around a little girl's neck. If I'm gone, your brother will find you. This will guide him. His throat burned. The air seemed to thin. Evelyn turned, catching his stare. Something wrong? He shook his head too quickly. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. The ghost of his mother, the echo of a promise he'd failed to keep, the life he'd traded for blood money. Down below, the engine hissed. A faint smell of fuel drifted upward. Evelyn wrinkled her nose. Is that safe? Marco forced calm into his voice. Just routine maintenance. She nodded, trusting him completely. The very man meant to kill her. Another beep. 15 minutes. Marco walked to the control panel, pretending to check the gauges, his mind spiraling. If he disarmed the system, Richard would know. The detonator was linked to a satellite tracker. If the signal didn't trigger an explosion by dawn, the next man on the chain would finish the job. He looked at Evelyn, her hands resting protectively over her belly. My niece, he thought. She's carrying my niece. The storm broke open. Thunder roared across the waves. Evelyn flinched, grabbing the railing. Marco rushed forward, catching her before she fell. Their eyes met, his filled with guilt, hers with trust. Hold on, he said hoarsely. No matter what happens, don't let go. Above them, lightning split the sky. Below, the timer reached its final digits. And somewhere on the island, Richard raised his glass to a night he thought would change everything. He was right, just not in the way he imagined. Rain began to fall in sharp, cold drops, stinging against Evelyn's skin as thunder cracked overhead. The sea had turned violent, each wave slamming against the yacht with the force of a heartbeat too big for the world. She gripped the railing tighter, her hair whipping wildly around her face. Captain! she shouted over the storm. Should we turn back? Marco didn't answer. His jaw was locked, eyes fixed on the horizon as if he could see through the wall of rain. Inside his chest, the countdown ticked louder than the thunder. 10 minutes left. He could almost feel the vibration of the explosive charge beneath the deck, waiting to turn this vessel into floating ash. Evelyn stumbled closer, fear creeping into her voice. Something's wrong, isn't it? Marco finally looked at her. For a moment, he saw not the woman he was supposed to kill, but the child from his dreams, the little sister clutching his hand as the fire swallowed their home. He had let go once. He wouldn't do it again. Go inside, he barked, harsher than he intended. She flinched but obeyed, retreating into the small cabin, trembling. Marco watched her disappear down the stairs, then exhaled shakily. He had 5 minutes to change everything. He ripped open the control panel, wires spilling out like veins. Lightning illuminated his face. Sweat, rain, guilt. He could cut the blue wire, stop the ignition, but the tracker would alert Richard that something was wrong. They'd come after her, after him, and finish the job another way. Think, Marco, think. The storm howled louder. Inside the cabin, Evelyn sank to the floor, clutching her belly, whispering to her unborn child. It's okay, sweetheart. Daddy just wants us safe again. We'll be there soon. Marco's stomach twisted. Safe. The word tasted like poison. 3 minutes. He grabbed the detonator case, sprinted down the narrow hall, and burst into the cabin. Evelyn gasped, startled by his wild expression. What's happening? She cried. He dropped to his knees, breath ragged. You have to trust me. Whatever you hear next, whatever happens, you stay down, do you understand? Her eyes widened. Marco, you're scaring me. He took her shoulders gently. Please, Evelyn, just trust me. Lightning flashed again, bathing them both in ghostly blue. She saw the torment in his eyes, and for reasons she couldn't explain, nodded. He reached behind the wall panel, grabbed the emergency flotation capsule, and yanked the release lever. A hidden hatch beneath the cabin floor clicked open, revealing a compact survival pod. Evelyn stared in confusion. Get in, he ordered. Why? Because I can't let you die. The words hit her like a physical blow. 2 minutes. Marco helped her inside, strapping her in as tears mixed with seawater on his face. You'll drift toward the current. There's an island 10 miles east. You'll make it before sunrise. She shook her head, panicked. I don't understand. What's happening? He cupped her face. Your husband paid me to kill you. Evelyn froze, eyes wide with horror. But I can't, he said, voice breaking, because you're my sister. Before she could speak, he slammed the hatch closed. That one button press sent the capsule shooting out from the side of the yacht into the raging waves. Marco staggered back, staring at the empty cabin. 1 minute. He turned, ran to the upper deck, and shouted into the storm. Come for me, Richard. I'll finish what you started. The explosion came like the wrath of heaven. Fire ripped through the yacht, lighting up the sea. From miles away, the flames looked like sunrise. But Evelyn was already gone, alive, carried by the waves toward a new truth waiting on the shore. The ocean was merciless that night. Waves towered like black mountains, crashing down on the tiny escape pod that carried Evelyn Cross and the child inside her. Every surge felt like the sky itself, trying to erase her from existence. But the pod was sealed tight, the glass window fogged by her shallow breaths and tears. She didn't know how long she'd been unconscious. When she finally opened her eyes, dawn was breaking over the endless sea, soft gold bleeding into blue. Smoke curled in the distance where the Elysium had been. She pressed her trembling hand to the window and whispered, Richard, but the word turned to ash in her throat. He had done this. Her husband, the father of her baby. The memory of Marco's voice echoed in her mind. Your husband paid me to kill you because you're my sister. It didn't make sense. None of it did. But one thing was certain. Richard's love had been a mask, and behind it was the man who had tried to end her life. Evelyn sobbed, clutching the blue crystal at her neck. Mama, she whispered, why didn't I see the truth sooner? Hours passed. The sun rose higher and the waves gentled. Exhaustion pulled at her, but a faint outline appeared on the horizon. An island. The same island where Richard waited, believing she was dead. By noon, the current carried the pod toward the shore. The capsule struck sand with a jolt. Evelyn forced the hatch open, dragging herself out onto the beach. She collapsed, coughing salt water, her body shaking violently. For a long moment she simply lay there, staring at the endless blue. Then she heard it. Footsteps. She turned her head, squinting against the sunlight. A figure approached, tall, limping slightly, his clothes torn and blackened by soot. It was Marco. Her breath caught. "You're alive?" He nodded, grimacing. "Barely." She struggled to sit up, anger and confusion warring in her eyes. "You said you worked for him." "I did," Marco said, sinking to his knees beside her. "Until I saw that necklace. Until I knew who you were." He pulled a charred piece of metal from his pocket, the half-melted casing of the detonator. "I stayed on the yacht to make sure no one followed your pod. When the fire started, I cut the signal. He thinks you're gone." Evelyn stared at him, words failing. "You saved me? After trying to kill me?" He looked away. "I never wanted this life, Evie. The money, the guns, the fear, they filled the space where family used to be. You were the last piece of that family I thought I'd lost." The sound of waves filled the silence between them. Finally, Evelyn said, "We can't stay here. He'll find out." Marco nodded. "I know, but not yet. First, you need rest." He helped her stand, his arm firm around her trembling shoulders. Together they walked toward the tree line, where the forest opened like a green mouth swallowing them whole. Behind them, the smoke from the wreckage drifted upward, curling into the shape of a serpent in the morning sky. On the island, miles away, Richard Cross clinked a glass of champagne against his lovers and smiled for the cameras. "To new beginnings," he said smoothly. And as he raised his glass, somewhere deep inside him, he felt the faintest unease, like a ghost breathing against his neck. Because the woman he thought he had burned to ashes was still alive, and she was coming home. The island looked like paradise from afar. White sand, palm trees swaying, a glass mansion gleaming on the cliffside. But paradise has a way of hiding rot beneath its beauty, and tonight, that rot wore a tuxedo and smiled for the cameras. Richard Cross stood beneath a string of golden lights, raising a glass of champagne to a crowd of investors, celebrities, and reporters. The gala was everything he had promised the world, a celebration of love, life, and philanthropy. Only he knew the truth, that love had drowned at sea hours ago. "Your wife would be proud," said Lila, his mistress, her crimson dress clinging to her like sin. He smirked. "She would have ruined the party." The guests laughed politely, thinking it was a joke. Only Richard's eyes betrayed him, cold, calculating, reflecting nothing but the sound of money. He turned toward the horizon, where faint plumes of smoke still rose from the sea. "To new beginnings," he whispered, clinking his glass against hers. Across the water, on the opposite side of the island, Evelyn stumbled through the dense brush, barefoot and shaking. Marco followed close behind, carrying what little he'd salvaged from the wreck, a flare gun, a compass, and a bundle of soaked bandages. They had reached the far shore undetected, the one Richard's security rarely patrolled. The air smelled of salt and ash. Every step Evelyn took sent pain shooting up her legs, but she refused to stop. The image of Richard laughing, drinking, celebrating her death kept her moving. "Slow down," Marco urged. "You're not strong enough to—" "I'm strong enough to face him," she snapped, turning to him with fire in her eyes. "He killed his own child. I need him to look me in the eyes when he pays for it." Marco hesitated. He saw their mother in her face when she said that. Defiant, trembling, fearless. "Then we'll do it right," he said. "We'll make him destroy himself. The police won't listen to a dead woman, Evie, but they'll listen to the proof." "Proof?" He nodded. "The detonator signal was transmitted through his offshore account. I traced it before I destroyed the yacht. I can use it to expose him and his precious company." Evelyn blinked, stunned. "You planned that?" "I've been planning my revenge for years," he said softly. "I just didn't know it would end up saving my family instead." The sound of music drifted faintly from the other side of the island, violins and laughter carried by the wind. Evelyn's heart twisted. That used to be their song, the one Richard played at their wedding. Her hand went to her belly. "I won't let him take everything from me again." Marco placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll take everything from him." They reached a clearing overlooking the mansion. Dozens of guests glittered under the lights like diamonds scattered on poison. At the center stood Richard and Lila, bathed in gold, smiling for the cameras. Evelyn's breath caught. "He doesn't even look guilty." "Men like him never do," Marco muttered. He pulled a small flash drive from his pocket and handed it to her. This holds the bank transfer, the offshore files, everything. We'll get it to someone who'll listen." She looked at him, trembling. "Who?" "An old contact of mine. Someone who owes me a favor." Thunder rolled faintly in the distance, as if the ocean itself was listening. From the hilltop, Evelyn watched her husband toast the crowd again. The world saw a philanthropist. She saw a murderer. And somewhere deep in her chest, something hardened. She wasn't just going to expose him. She was going to destroy him. The leak happened before they expected. Marco had spent the afternoon tracing satellites, bank ledgers, and offshore shell companies, fingers stained from coffee and salt. In the heat of the jungle, he wheeled through the tiny battery backup on his handheld, then tapped the encrypted drive to life. He did not feel triumphant. He felt exposed. Evelyn watched him work with a steady, hard gaze, her belly a quiet reminder that time was no longer on either of their sides. "3 contacts," Marco said, his voice low. "1 journalist, 1 fixer, 1 lawyer. We leak to the reporter, they publish, the fixer buys the server, the lawyer files the restraining orders." Evelyn nodded. "Make sure my name isn't attached." He paused, staring at her hands. "You're already a ghost," she laughed, a brittle sound. "Then haunt him." Marco compressed the files until the flash drive was a sliver, then tucked it into a waterproof cigarette case. He wrapped the case in a napkin, folded the napkin into a coin, and stepped onto a narrow path that would take him to the island's perimeter. The gala had security, but not every inch of it. The party smelled like perfume, power, and pity. Richard moved through the room with the ease of a man who had practiced pretending forever. Lila laughed too loudly, her hand resting on his arm. Marco walked the shoreline, tucking the napkin into the pocket of a homeless man's discarded coat. He watched as the coat was picked up, moved through the night, and eventually abandoned at a curb near the press tents. The journalist found it by accident, curious about a rumor and hungry for a scoop. By morning, the headline hit the feeds. Evidence links cross tycoon to yacht explosion. Offshore transfers revealed. Conversations shifted tone. A senator called a journalist. A lawyer read the leak at breakfast. A late-night show cued a segment. On the island, cameras swung toward Richard, zooming in on his face. There was a twitch around his mouth. He tried to smile, but the smile was sand in the wound. He had insured himself against scandal. But this was more surgical. People whispered. Did she have enemies? Who pays in cash like that? The feed demanded answers, and no spin could slow it. Lila shrank back. "We need to go," she whispered, pressing a palm to his chest. He drank faster, trying to manufacture courage. On the far shore, Evelyn read the headlines through Marco's phone, the words exploding like gunfire. She felt each syllable as if it were a blow. Marco set the plan in motion. "Now," he said. Evelyn inhaled, and then they moved, 2 shadows slipping toward a world that had just realized it had been lied to. They had the flash drive, a story, and the sea. But truth demanded theater. Marco arranged for the fixer to intercept a major news satellite with a pre-prepared dossier. The lawyer prepared a whistleblower complaint to the federal agency, citing murder, fraud, and money laundering. The files were clean and damning, with account numbers, timestamps, and voice clips. One clip had Richard's voice, bargaining, cold and precise. It said plainly, "Make it look like an accident. Handle the money, no witnesses." The journalist played the clip on air. A nation heard it breathe. Social feeds burned, and the mansion's glitter dulled. Evelyn sat in the dirt, feeling both fragile and relentless. Marco placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's beginning," he said. The ocean roared as if. By the time the news broke globally, Richard Cross's name was everywhere. TV anchors, headlines, whispered gossip between investors. The footage of the explosion replayed on every channel, the words "murder for money scheme" flashing beneath his photograph. He had built an empire on illusion. Now it was collapsing faster than he could pour another drink. "Turn it off," he snarled at the TV. Lila hesitated, remote, trembling in her hand. "They're saying they found financial traces," she whispered. "They're calling it premeditated." Richard grabbed the remote and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the marble. "It's a smear campaign. Evelyn's dead." "Dead," he shouted, voice cracking with something that almost sounded like fear. But fear has a smell, and Lila could sense it now, the kind that makes powerful men unpredictable. She took a careful step back. "Richard," she said softly, If they trace the money, they'll find me too. He looked at her then, eyes cold as stone. Then you'd better disappear before they do. Outside, thunder grumbled over the horizon. The wind shifted, bringing with it the faint scent of salt and smoke. On the far side of the island, a small fishing boat creaked toward the shore. Marco's hands worked the oars, his muscles straining. In the dim light, Evelyn sat in silence, her eyes locked on the mansion that glowed like a golden lie against the black sky. "He's scared," Marco said. "That's when men like him make mistakes." Evelyn's hand moved to the crystal at her neck. "He already made one," she said quietly. "He thought I wouldn't survive." They reached the dock. Marco threw a tarp over the boat, then handed her a long coat. "You can't go to him yet. Let the world see the truth first." "I'm not hiding anymore," she said, stepping onto the dock. "He made me a ghost, Marco. Now I'll haunt him." She walked barefoot along the path toward the mansion. Rain began to fall again, thin, silver lines slicing through the night. Her hair clung to her face, her dress heavy with seawater, but her spine stayed straight. At the entrance, the guards didn't stop her. Maybe it was the shock of seeing a woman they thought was dead. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, like vengeance wrapped in silk. She passed them without a word. Inside, the party had dissolved into chaos. Reporters swarmed the ballroom, demanding statements. Flashbulbs exploded like lightning. Richard stood near the bar, sweating under the bright lights, every camera pointed at his crumbling composure. "Mr. Cross," one reporter shouted, "do you deny the offshore accounts? The payment to a man named Marco Bellini?" "I deny everything," he snapped. "These are lies, fabrications." The words froze on his lips. The crowd went still, heads turned toward the doorway. There she was, Evelyn Cross, alive. Her skin was pale, her eyes dark with exhaustion and fire. The crystal necklace caught the light and sent a shard of blue across the room. The sound of whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Cameras clicked. Someone gasped. Richard stumbled back, his face draining of color. "No," he whispered. "You're supposed to be." "Dead," she finished, voice steady, cold. "You almost got it right." She stepped closer. Every flash of the cameras illuminated the truth, his guilt, her survival, and the chasm of betrayal between them. Lila's glass slipped from her hand, shattering at her feet. Evelyn didn't flinch. "The only thing that's going to die tonight, Richard," she said softly, "is your empire." Outside, lightning struck the ocean, and for a brief moment the world lit up, just enough for everyone to see who the real monster was. Flashbulbs blinded Richard Cross as Evelyn stepped into the ballroom, dripping with seawater and fury. The air froze. The orchestra stopped mid-note. Every guest, politicians, investors, celebrities, turned toward the doorway where the ghost of his crimes now stood alive. Her heels clicked against the marble, echoing louder than the thunder outside. No one dared to speak. Cameras recorded every second as the woman he had paid to vanish walked straight toward him. "Evelyn?" Richard stammered, the mask slipping from his face. "My God, you're alive." She tilted her head, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "You sound surprised." I thought the yacht, there was an accident." She laughed softly, the sound hollow. "You mean the accident you arranged?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lila took a step back, clutching her chest. "Richard?" she whispered. Evelyn didn't even look at her. Her gaze was locked on her husband. "You really should have chosen a better assassin. The man you paid to kill me had more humanity than you ever did." Reporters surged forward, microphones out. "Mrs. Cross, are you saying your husband tried to have you killed?" She smiled faintly. "I'm not saying it. I'm proving it." Marco appeared in the doorway behind her, rain still clinging to his coat. He held up a small silver drive. "Here's the proof," he said, his accent thick but steady. "Bank transfers, satellite pings, voice recordings. The money trail leads straight to him." The crowd erupted in chaos, flashes, screams, shouts for security. Richard lunged forward, snatching the microphone from a reporter's hand. "Lies," he bellowed. "This is blackmail. That man is a criminal." Marco's eyes darkened. "You're right, I was, until I met the sister you tried to burn alive." Silence slammed into the room. Evelyn looked around slowly, making sure every camera caught her face. "He didn't just try to kill me," she said. "He tried to kill our child." She rested her hands on her stomach. "His heir." Lila gasped, realizing she'd never been the replacement, just the convenience. She turned to Richard, her voice trembling. "Is that true?" Richard tried to speak, but no sound came. Sweat poured down his temples as security closed in, unsure whether to protect or arrest him. Evelyn took one step closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "You built everything on lies, Richard, and tonight, they all drown." Marco handed the drive to a journalist. "Broadcast it," he said simply. Within minutes, the footage hit live streams and networks around the world. Richard's voice, his transaction logs, the exact moment he ordered the death of his wife and unborn child. The audience's gasps turned into shouts. Investors began to leave, whispering about lawsuits and board meetings. Lila backed away toward the exit, mascara streaking her cheeks. Richard looked around wildly, a trapped animal in a glass cage. "You think they'll believe you?" he hissed at Evelyn. "You're nothing without me." She met his glare with a quiet strength. "I was nothing because of you." The room fell into stunned silence as police officers entered through the side doors. The flash of handcuffs glinted under the chandeliers. As they pulled Richard away, he twisted in rage. "You'll regret this, Evelyn. You and your filthy brother." She didn't move. "Maybe," she said softly, "but at least we'll be alive to regret it." The officers let him out as reporters shouted questions, cameras following every step. Evelyn stood under the harsh lights, the sea still clinging to her hair, the necklace gleaming like a verdict. She turned toward the cameras. "Money buys silence," she said, her voice breaking but strong. "But truth? Truth screams louder." And for the first time, the world listened. The ballroom emptied within hours, leaving shattered glasses, overturned chairs, and a silence that felt like judgment. The glittering chandeliers above flickered, as if even the lights were ashamed of what they had seen. Evelyn stood in the middle of it all, drenched in sea and truth, her heart still pounding from the chaos she'd unleashed. Marco stood beside her, watching the police cars disappear down the winding coastal road with Richard Cross in handcuffs. "It's done," he murmured. "He'll never hurt you again." Evelyn didn't answer. Her hands trembled as she clutched the crystal necklace, the same one that had saved her life. She could still hear the reporters shouting, the flash of cameras capturing the moment her husband's empire fell apart. And yet, beneath the triumph, there was grief. Grief for the man she'd loved, for the years she'd wasted, and for the child who almost never had a chance. "He'll be charged with conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder," Marco said quietly. "But that's not the end. His company will burn too. Every investor will run." Evelyn sank onto a chair, exhaustion washing over her. "And what about you?" Marco hesitated. "I'm a criminal, Evie. You can expose me too if you want. I've done worse than him." She looked up at him, at the man who had once been sent to kill her and instead had chosen redemption. "You saved me," she said softly. "You saved your sister. That's all that matters now." Outside, dawn broke. The storm had passed, but the world still felt heavy, bruised. The sea lapped against the rocks below, whispering secrets only it could keep. Marco turned away, staring out the massive glass windows of the ballroom. "He'll talk," he said. "He'll try to drag everyone down with him." "Then let him," Evelyn replied. "The truth will drown him before anyone else can." Moments later, the authorities returned to take formal statements. Evelyn sat through hours of questioning. Details of the yacht, the explosion, the motive. She told everything, her voice steady, her heart numb. When they asked how she'd survived, she simply said, "The ocean decided I wasn't finished yet." By evening, the story dominated every major network. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire arrested for attempted murder of pregnant wife." The public turned from admiration to disgust. Richard's company's stock plummeted overnight, investors cut ties, his name became a curse. Meanwhile, Evelyn stayed hidden in a small beachside inn at the far end of the island. Marco stood guard outside her door, chain smoking as if the nicotine could keep his guilt at bay. "You should leave," she said through the cracked window, "before they connect you to the explosion." He shook his head. "I'm not running anymore. Maybe it's time I paid for everything I've done." Tears stung her eyes. "You're not the same man who took that job." "No," he said, looking at her belly. "But that doesn't erase what I was." They sat in silence for a long time, the night stretching between them like an old wound. Finally, Evelyn whispered, "When I saw that yacht burning, I thought it was the end of everything, but maybe it was the beginning." Marco smiled faintly. "Fire has a way of cleaning the rot, little sister. Maybe that's all we did, Burn the lies away. She touched the glass between them. Then promise me this, no more blood. He nodded. Only truth. Somewhere beyond the window, the ocean sighed, and for the first time in years it sounded like peace. By morning, the world had turned into a courtroom. Headlines screamed betrayal, investors fled like rats from a sinking ship, and Richard Cross's billion-dollar empire began to collapse faster than the tide. But for Evelyn, the noise of the world meant nothing. She sat on the narrow balcony of the small inn, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the sea that had almost claimed her life. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the fire, the explosion, the moment everything she believed in disintegrated. The world thought justice had been served, but inside, she felt hollow. Survival, she realized, was its own kind of punishment. Marco entered quietly, carrying a tray of tea. His movements were deliberate, careful, as if he were afraid to break the fragile peace between them. "You didn't sleep," he said. "Neither did you," she replied. He gave a small, tired smile. "Old habits. The streets don't teach you how to rest, only how to stay alive." Evelyn looked at him. "Do you regret saving me?" Marco blinked, startled. "What kind of question is that?" "You could have walked away with $500 million, she said. "No one would have known." He leaned against the railing, lighting a cigarette. "I would have known." He exhaled smoke into the soft morning air. "That money was blood. Our mother used to say, if you drink poison long enough, you forget the taste of water." I think I just remembered. Her throat tightened. For the first time since the explosion, she reached out and touched his hand. "You didn't just save me," she said. "You saved the part of me that still believes people can change." Marco looked down at their joined hands, then away. "You shouldn't believe that too easily. There's still a warrant with my name on it somewhere in this world." "Then we'll make it right," Evelyn said firmly. "You have evidence, you can testify." He shook his head. "Testify? You don't testify against people like Richard Cross. You testify and you disappear, and this time they won't miss." Evelyn's eyes hardened. "I won't hide, not again." He smiled faintly. "You sound like her." "Like who?" "Our mother," he said softly. "The night she ran, she told me, if the world tries to drown you, swim until your lungs burn. That's when you'll know you're still alive." Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes. "She would have been proud of you." "No," he said quietly. "She would have been proud of you." The moment hung between them, raw, tender, and unbearably real. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and his expression changed. "What is it?" Evelyn asked. "They're moving him," Marco said. "Richard, he's being transferred to the mainland for arraignment tonight." Evelyn straightened. "Then it's time." "Time for what?" "To end this," she said. "For good." He frowned. "Evie?" She turned to face him, her eyes fierce. "He tried to erase me. He built everything on pain. I won't let him disappear into a cell and pretend this was all a mistake. The world needs to see what he really is." Marco crushed the cigarette beneath his boot. "If you go after him now, you'll be hunted again. You sure you're ready for that?" Evelyn didn't blink. "I survived fire and betrayal. I can survive the truth." Marco studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then let's finish what we started." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of salt and ash. The sea that once tried to take her now seemed to whisper encouragement. This time, Evelyn wasn't a victim. She was the storm. The sun had barely risen when Evelyn Cross stepped off the porch of the seaside inn, dressed in borrowed jeans and a plain white shirt. Gone was the woman who once wore diamonds and silk. What remained was harder, quieter, tempered steel beneath fragile skin. Marco waited by the truck, checking the magazine of a small handgun before tucking it away. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked. "There's no coming back after today." Evelyn climbed into the passenger seat without hesitation. "He destroyed everything I ever believed in. I just want him to face what he's done." Marco started the engine. The gravel crunched under the tires as they left the coast behind, winding up through the jungle roads that led toward the small port where federal agents were scheduled to transport Richard Cross back to the mainland. "He'll be surrounded by guards," Marco said. "Media too. You'll get your moment, but it'll be chaos." "Good," Evelyn replied. "Let him see me in front of everyone. Let him know he didn't bury me." They drove in silence for miles. The radio crackled with updates. Billionaire Richard Cross to be transferred to mainland prison under federal watch. Prosecutors confirm new evidence of money laundering and murder-for-hire payments. Marco glanced at her. You know, the world already believes him guilty. You don't need to stand there. Evelyn turned to him, eyes steady. This isn't for the world, it's for me. When they reached the port, the scene was chaos. Reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, police sirens wailing. The air smelled of diesel and rain. The transport van was parked near the dock, surrounded by officers. Richard emerged in handcuffs, wearing a tailored suit wrinkled from the night in custody. His face was pale but defiant. Lila wasn't beside him anymore. She had already turned state witness, trading loyalty for freedom. Evelyn stepped out of the crowd. The murmur rippled instantly. She's alive. Reporters shouted, microphones thrust toward her, but she didn't stop. She walked straight through the chaos until she stood a few feet from him. For a long moment, no one spoke. Richard's mouth twitched. You should have stayed dead, he said quietly, his voice full of venom. Evelyn tilted her head, almost smiling. You should have loved me. His jaw tightened. You think you've won? The truth won't save you. The world forgets. Maybe, she said. But the ocean doesn't. The officers moved to separate them, but Marco held them back with a nod to the lead agent. Give her a minute. Evelyn leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. I want you to know something, Richard. When that yacht exploded, I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of what kind of father you would have been to our child. That's what kept me alive. His face flickered. Anger, fear, something unspoken. You think you're better than me? No, she said softly. Just braver. The agents pulled him away. Cameras followed as he was loaded into the armored van. But before the door closed, Evelyn said one last thing. Every lie burns eventually. You just forgot fire spreads. The door slammed shut. The van rolled forward, flashing lights cutting through the mist. Evelyn exhaled, her body trembling. Marco put a hand on her shoulder. You got your moment, he said quietly. She nodded. Now we finish it. He frowned. Finish what? His empire, she said. It's not enough to put him behind bars. The world needs to know what he built his fortune on. Marco stared at her, realizing she meant it. You're really going to take down everything he owns? Her voice was calm, almost serene. Not take it down, she said. Clean it. And with that, Evelyn Cross turned away from the flashing cameras, the chaos, and the past, walking straight toward a reckoning only she could deliver. 3 days after Richard's arrest, his empire began to rot from the inside out. The news called it the Cross Collapse. Stocks free fell, employees quit overnight, and government agents swarmed his corporate offices like hornets. But while the world devoured the scandal, Evelyn Cross stayed hidden, building something far more dangerous, truth with precision. She and Marco had turned an abandoned radio station on the mainland into their base. Its cracked windows and humming generators became the heartbeat of a quiet revolution. Piles of documents covered the table. Bank ledgers, shell companies, contracts written in invisible ink. Marco tossed a folder in front of her. Here's the rest. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Singapore, Zurich, everything Richard used to wash dirty money. Evelyn skimmed through it, her pen flying across a legal pad. He used charity foundations, she said bitterly. Children's hospitals, relief funds, conservation projects. He turned hope into a laundromat. Marco watched her, a strange mix of admiration and worry in his eyes. You're scaring me, Evie. You sound like me 10 years ago. She didn't look up. Then maybe I finally understand you. He laughed under his breath. Don't say that. I've done too much to keep you from becoming me. She paused, meeting his eyes. You saved me once? Let me return the favor. The sound of rain drummed against the roof. Marco paced the room. You want to dismantle a billion-dollar network while you're 6 months pregnant. You realize how insane that sounds? Evelyn smiled faintly. Insanity built this empire. Truth will burn it down. She plugged a drive into the old transmitter, connecting it to an encrypted line. We leak one company at a time, she explained. Each file links back to another. Investors, politicians, banks, every name that fed from him will feed justice instead. Marco crossed his arms. And when they trace it back to you? She looked at him with quiet defiance. They can't kill what's already been declared dead. That silenced him. Hours turned into days. One by one, Evelyn uploaded files to investigative journalists across the world. Each new leak was a bullet. Cross Energy falsifies safety reports. Cross Foundation linked to offshore bribery. New evidence suggests cover-ups in multiple countries. The world's outrage grew louder. Protesters marched outside the company's skyscraper headquarters. Shareholders filed lawsuits. Banks froze his assets. Meanwhile, in his prison cell, Richard watched the news in disbelief. "She's alive and she's dismantling me?" he muttered, punching the wall until his knuckles bled. Guards ignored him. The cameras didn't. The footage of his breakdown went viral. The fall of a billionaire. Back in the radio station, Evelyn watched the same footage on a cracked screen. Marco placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's over," he said. She shook her head slowly. "Not yet. There's still the board, the men who helped him. If they walk free, everything he did will repeat." Marco sighed. "Then what's the plan?" Evelyn turned the screen toward him. On it was a list of names, all powerful men who had profited from Richard's empire. "We bring them down. All of them." He stared at her, recognizing the fire in her eyes, the same fire that once drove him through the underworld. "You're your mother's daughter," he said quietly. Evelyn touched her stomach. "And his mother's son," she replied. Marco smiled sadly. "Then let's finish it. For her." As thunder rolled outside, Evelyn hit send on the next file. Across the world, another server went live, and with that single click, the empire that once owned oceans began to drown in its own greed. The world was on fire, and Evelyn Cross had lit the match. Every news outlet carried her leaks. Politicians distanced themselves from Richard Cross's empire. Investors pulled out in droves. The once untouchable dynasty had turned into a cautionary tale. But power never dies quietly, and neither do the men who depend on it. It started with a phone call at midnight. Marco picked up before the second ring. "Bellini," he said automatically. A familiar voice answered. "You've made powerful enemies, old friend." Marco stiffened. "Who is this?" "Someone who used to owe Richard Cross a favor. Someone who doesn't like seeing that debt burned alive." The line went dead. Evelyn looked up from her laptop, sensing his change in expression. "What is it?" He slid the phone into his pocket. "Nothing you need to worry about." "Marco," she pressed. "Don't lie to me." He sighed. "They're coming. His old partners, the ones who supplied him, hid his money, kept his empire alive. They don't care about Richard anymore. They care about what we took from them." Evelyn's blood ran cold. "The leaks," he nodded. "You cut off their power, and men like that only know how to take it back." Outside, the rain returned, slashing across the broken windows of the old radio station. The world might have been celebrating justice, but here in the shadows, vengeance was already stirring. "We move tonight," Marco said, stuffing the files into a duffel bag. "They'll trace the signal soon." Evelyn unplugged the transmitter. "Where do we go?" "Somewhere quiet," he replied. "Somewhere the noise of truth can't find us until we want it to." But the noise found them first. As they packed, headlights flashed through the rain outside. Marco froze. "Down," he hissed, pulling Evelyn behind an overturned desk. Bullets shattered the window a second later. Glass exploded. Papers flew. Evelyn screamed as the air filled with the crack of gunfire. Marco crawled across the floor, grabbed his pistol, and returned fire. One shot hit a car tire. The others vanished into the storm. The attackers retreated, leaving silence and the smell of gunpowder behind. Evelyn's breathing was ragged. "They were trying to kill us." Marco wiped blood from his arm. "They were sending a message." She stared at him. "Then we send one back." He laughed bitterly. "You're becoming more like me every day." "No," she said firmly. "I'm becoming who I have to be." By dawn, they were gone. The radio station burned behind them, a final trace erased. They drove through the coastal fog in a stolen jeep, heading toward the mainland city. Evelyn worked on her laptop the entire way, her fingers steady despite the tremors in her body. "What are you doing?" Marco asked. "Finishing the story," she said. "They want silence. I'll give them noise so loud it never dies." She uploaded the next round of files, not just corporate names, but personal accounts, offshore trustees, politicians, mob financiers. Everyone who ever touched Richard's fortune would now be exposed. When the upload completed, she closed the laptop. "There. Now they'll turn on each other before they find us." Marco looked at her with something between awe and fear. "You're dangerous." Evelyn smiled faintly. "No, I'm free." Behind them, the sky began to lighten. The first morning rays hit the smoke from the burning radio tower, turning it gold. In some ways it looked like sunrise. In others, it looked like warning. And somewhere, in a glass office across the ocean, a man who once called Richard partner poured himself a drink and muttered, "If the wife won't die, maybe the brother will." The first bullet missed Marco by less than an inch. It shattered the glass behind him as he ducked, dragging Evelyn to the ground. The cafe windows burst inward, screams erupting as bystanders scattered. The quiet street they'd chosen for breakfast turned into a battlefield in seconds. "Stay down!" Marco shouted, pulling his gun from under the table. Evelyn's pulse thundered in her ears as she crawled behind the counter. She smelled coffee, gunpowder, and fear. The men outside moved fast, professional, trained, relentless. Marco returned fire, hitting one, then two. The others melted into the crowd like ghosts. Sirens wailed in the distance. When the shooting stopped, Evelyn dared to lift her head. Marco stood over her, blood trickling down his temple, breathing hard. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said, though her hands shook. "You're bleeding." He wiped it with the back of his sleeve. "Not mine to worry about." The cafe owner peeked out from the kitchen, terrified. "Please, you have to go before the police come." They ran out the back alley, their footsteps echoing against the wet pavement. The rain had returned, washing blood and glass into the gutters. "They found us," Evelyn gasped. "I told you they would," Marco said. "Richard's partners don't care about the courts. They're cleaning house." Evelyn stopped in the middle of the street, rain soaking through her clothes. "Then we take the fight to them." Marco stared at her. "You think this is a movie? They don't stop. They don't forgive. They'll keep coming until we're buried next to him." She turned to face him, eyes blazing. "Then let's make sure they don't have a place to run." Her words hit him like a slap. Defiant, fearless, impossible. She reminded him of himself once, before he became the man who killed for a living, and for the first time, he felt something close to pride. They drove for hours, crossing through narrow roads that led to the outskirts of the city. Marco knew the underworld better than anyone. He had old contacts, fixers, smugglers, men who owed him debts that couldn't be erased. By nightfall, they reached a crumbling warehouse near the docks. Inside, Marco opened a steel locker, revealing weapons, fake passports, and stacks of cash wrapped in plastic. Evelyn looked around, stunned. "You were planning to run?" He smirked. "I always plan for when people change their minds." Evelyn stepped closer. "Then plan for something else. Justice." He laughed softly. "Justice doesn't exist in my world, little sister. Only balance." "Then we'll make them the same thing." Marco studied her. "You really believe that, don't you?" "I have to," she said. "Otherwise, everything we've done means nothing." He nodded slowly. "All right, if we're doing this, we need a name. The man who ordered this hit." Evelyn pulled a small envelope from her pocket. "Already got it." He opened it. Inside was a photo, an older man in a tailored suit, sipping whiskey beside Richard at some charity gala. The caption read, "Graham Vance, CFO of Cross Global Holdings." Marco whistled. "Powerful, connected, ruthless. He'll expect a war." Evelyn's voice was steady. "Then we'll give him one." They began to plan, routes, timing, names, allies. Each step was a risk. Each move drew them closer to danger. But Evelyn's resolve hardened with every breath. She wasn't running anymore. At dawn, as the sun broke over the sea, she looked out the window. "You think they'll ever stop?" Marco joined her. "No, but fear doesn't live forever." She turned, eyes glinting like steel. "Good, because neither do they." And with that, the cross war truly began. The storm that began with one woman's survival had turned into a full-blown war. By the end of the week, Evelyn Cross was no longer just the billionaire's betrayed wife. She was a symbol. Headlines called her the ghost who exposed the elite. Protesters carried signs with her face. Women across the world wrote to her, thanking her for standing up to men like Richard Cross. But behind the noise and the fame, Evelyn was planning something the cameras could never see. "Public outrage isn't justice," she told Marco as they sat in the dark of the warehouse. "These men have backup plans. They'll bury evidence, bribe judges, rewrite their crimes. We need to end them in a way that sticks." Marco cleaned his gun slowly, eyes on her. "You talk like a soldier now. Maybe you finally rubbed off on me." He smiled grimly. "Then let's hope not too much." On the table between them lay a map. Lines, circles, names. Graham Vance was at the center. He was the man behind the offshore labyrinth, the one who handled Richard's secret accounts. And now that Richard was behind bars, Vance controlled everything left of his empire. Vance will move the money, Marco said. He'll try to hide it before the government freezes it. Once he does, he's clean. Evelyn studied the map. Then we catch him in the act. They set the plan into motion that same night. Evelyn contacted a journalist who owed her the truth. Using an anonymous identity, she arranged a live sting, an exclusive recording of Vance's secret transfer. In exchange, the journalist would broadcast everything, uncut, to the world. It was risky. It was reckless. It was perfect. 2 nights later, Evelyn stood in the shadows outside a private bank on the mainland. The city glowed around her like a false promise. Marco watched from across the street through binoculars, a small earpiece linking them. "He's here," Marco said. 3 cars, 2 guards. Evelyn's heartbeat steadied. "Then let's end it." Vance emerged from the limousine, a polished man in his 60s with a serpent smile. He handed a briefcase to the banker, who led him inside. Evelyn waited until the door shut behind them, then stepped forward, her disguise simple. A dark wig, glasses, and determination sharper than fear. Inside, the bank's vault room hummed with tension. Screens displayed millions of dollars moving through coded accounts. Evelyn pressed record on her hidden camera. "Transfer all holdings from Cross Global to Cayman subsidiary account," Vance instructed. The banker hesitated. "Sir, those funds are frozen by federal order." Vance smiled thinly. "Not anymore." Evelyn stepped out from the shadows. "You're right. They're gone somewhere else." Vance froze. "Who?" She pulled off her glasses. "You remember me, the woman your partner tried to erase." He backed up, pale. "You're supposed to be dead." "That line's getting old," she said coldly. Before he could speak, Marco burst through the side door, gun drawn. The guards reached for theirs, but Marco fired first, warning shots that shattered the marble columns. "Nobody dies tonight," he growled. "Not yet." Evelyn tossed the flash drive at Vance's feet. "That's your confession," she said. "Every account, every lie, the world's watching." Outside, the journalist's team was already live-streaming the confrontation. The moment Vance's voice cracked, the audio captured everything. By morning, headlines exploded again. "Final Cross conspirator caught in global sting." Evelyn watched the sunrise from the docks, exhausted but unbroken. Marco joined her, holstering his gun. "You won," he said. She shook her head. "No, the truth did." He smiled faintly. "Maybe they're the same thing now." The war was over. But peace still had to be earned. The world woke up to chaos. Every major news outlet replayed the footage of Graham Vance's arrest. The journalist's live stream had gone viral, hundreds of millions of views, a nation watching Evelyn Cross stand face to face with the man who once controlled her husband's empire. For the first time in her life, Evelyn wasn't running. She was leading. By midday, the government announced a full-scale investigation into Cross Global Holdings. Dozens of board members were indicted. The company's assets were frozen, its buildings seized, its executives interrogated. Richard Cross, still in federal custody, was left with nothing. No allies, no power, not even his name. The media called it the Cross Purge. Evelyn called it closure. But behind that closure there was an ache, a wound no amount of justice could heal. She sat by the window of the safe house, watching the rain trace lines down the glass. Marco entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You haven't slept in 2 days," he said. "Neither have you." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, but I look good doing it." She laughed softly for the first time in weeks. "You should rest, Marco. It's over." His eyes darkened. "It's never over. You don't burn down an empire without someone trying to rebuild it in blood." She turned toward him. "What are you not telling me?" He hesitated. "There's a bounty on my head." Evelyn froze. "From who?" "Vance's people. The ones who escaped the sweep. They want revenge for everything we exposed." She set her cup down. "Then we'll disappear. We'll find somewhere safe." He shook his head. "No, you're staying. You've got the baby to think about. I'll handle this." "Handle it how?" she snapped. "By getting killed?" He looked at her, really looked at her, the way a brother looks when he's already made peace with his fate. "Someone has to clean up what's left, and if I don't, they'll come for you next." Her voice cracked. "Marco, please, I can't lose you too," he smiled sadly. "You won't. You'll just see me less." Before she could protest, he placed the necklace's twin, a simple silver coin, into her palm. "Mom gave me this the night of the fire," he said. "Said it would protect me. Guess it's your turn now." "Don't do this," she whispered. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead. "You gave me back my soul, Evie. Let me give you your future." That night he was gone. Hours later, a storm rolled in from the sea. Evelyn stood on the porch, watching the lightning flash across the waves, praying he'd come back. But the call came at dawn. A voice on the other end saying only, "It's done." Marco had gone after the remnants of Vance's network. The police found the wreckage of 3 vehicles near the docks. Charred, twisted metal, no bodies recovered. Evelyn dropped the phone, tears streaming silently down her face. The headlines declared it a gang war. Another act of revenge in the ashes of Cross Global. But she knew the truth. Her brother hadn't gone to kill. He'd gone to make sure no one else ever could. She stood by the shore for hours, the ocean wind cold against her skin. Then, slowly, she unclasped the blue crystal necklace, the one that had once saved her life, and let it fall into the waves. "For you," she whispered, "for all of it." The sun rose, golden and quiet. The storm had passed, but Evelyn knew peace always demanded a price. And hers had just been paid. 3 weeks passed. The world had moved on, or at least pretended to. Cross Global was dead, its name dissolved into lawsuits and scandal. The media stopped calling, the headlines faded. The woman they once called the ghost wife disappeared from the news cycle, replaced by newer stories, fresher tragedies. But Evelyn Cross was still here. She lived quietly in a small coastal town under an assumed name. Her baby was due any day now, and the quiet rhythm of the sea was the only thing that kept her sane. Every morning, she walked along the shore with one hand on her belly, listening to the waves whisper like they remembered everything. She tried not to think of Marco. But silence is cruel. It fills itself with memories. The way he used to smirk, the cigarette dangling from his lip, the soft way he said her name when he thought she was asleep. She'd buried him in her heart because there was no body to bury in the ground. One morning, she found something on the sand, a sealed envelope, damp, frayed at the edges, stamped with a symbol she recognized instantly, the coin her brother used to carry. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. The ink was smudged, but the handwriting was unmistakable, Marco's. Inside was a single folded page, written in his rough, impatient scrawl. "Evie, if you're reading this, I'm gone, or I've finally done something worth dying for. Don't cry. I've had more lives than I deserve. I told you once that justice doesn't exist in my world. You proved me wrong. There's a locker in Marseille, number 23. Inside is everything I couldn't destroy. Proof, money, contacts, protection. Use it to build something better, something ours. And if the sea ever whispers my name, tell her I'm sorry for all the blood. M." Evelyn pressed the letter to her lips, tears mixing with the salt wind. He wasn't just gone, he'd planned for her to survive again. That night she dreamed of him. In the dream, he stood by the water, the necklace's twin coin glinting in the moonlight. He didn't speak, he only nodded, like a promise kept. The next morning, Evelyn packed her things. The journey to Marseille was long. Planes, trains, endless waiting rooms where people didn't know or care who she was. But when she opened the locker, she found exactly what he'd promised. Stacks of cash, documents marked confidential, a small box containing the silver coin he'd given her before the fire. Beneath it all was a photograph, an old picture of them as children, sitting by the sea with their mother, smiling into a future neither of them could have imagined. On the back, Marco had written, "Home isn't a place, it's the people you keep alive." Evelyn clutched the photo against her chest and broke down, the sobs quiet but raw. When she finally looked up, she felt something shift inside her. Grief no longer felt like drowning, it felt like breathing underwater. She took the money, left the rest, and walked out into the sunlight. Later that night, she wired the funds anonymously to start a charity foundation. Its name was simple, the Crosswave Initiative. Its mission, helping women rebuild after violence and corruption, spread faster than she expected. Reporters never knew it was her. The public never saw her face again. But somewhere, in every act of kindness the foundation created, Marco's ghost lived on. And every night, when Evelyn looked out at the ocean, she could almost hear him whisper, "You did it, little sister. You made it right." It was almost midnight when Evelyn heard the knock. The sound was soft, hesitant, the kind of knock that doesn't belong to strangers. She froze at the kitchen table, a half-finished cup of tea trembling in her hands. Outside, the storm howled against the windows, rain thrashing like a memory that refused to fade. For months, she'd lived in quiet exile. Her charity, the Crosswave Initiative, had become a quiet success, saving women whose names would never make the news. The money Marco left behind was spent rebuilding lives, not destroying them. Evelyn had found peace, or at least the illusion of it, but peace, she'd learned, never lasts forever. The knock came again. She set the cup down, her pulse quickening. Her mind raced through possibilities. A neighbor, a reporter who'd traced her identity, or worse, someone who hadn't forgotten the Cross Empire's collapse. She reached for the small pistol Marco had left her, hidden in a drawer beside the door. "Who's there?" she called out. Silence. Then a low voice, hoarse, familiar. "Evie, open up." Her breath caught. It couldn't be. She unlatched the door slowly, rain spilling in as she pulled it open, and there he was. Marco. Alive. He stood in the doorway, drenched, a scar cutting across his cheek, eyes haunted but alive. He leaned heavily against the frame, blood seeping through his shirt. "You really need better locks," he muttered, his old smirk flickering through the pain. Evelyn's heart stopped. "You're supposed to be—" "Yeah," he interrupted weakly. "Dead. Guess I missed the memo." She rushed forward, catching him as he nearly collapsed. "Oh my God, Marco. What happened?" He winced. "Vance's people, the few that made it out, they're gone now." She dragged him inside, closing the door against the storm. "Gone? I finished it," he said simply, "for good." She stared at him, torn between relief and fury. "You disappeared for months. I thought you were dead again." "I tried to be," he said with a faint grin. "Didn't take." She laughed through her tears, pressing a towel to his wound. "You idiot." "I learned from the best," he murmured. As the night wore on, Marco told her everything. The ambush, the chase, the explosion that faked his death for the second time. He had crawled from the wreckage, hunted, bleeding, but alive. And when he realized the war was finally over, he followed the only compass he had left, her. "You built something, Evie," he said, gesturing weakly toward the framed newspaper clipping on her wall. "The Crosswave Initiative saves thousands. You made the world believe again." She looked at him, tears in her eyes. "We did." He shook his head. "No. You did. I just cleaned up the mess." They sat in silence, the rain easing into a soft drizzle outside. Evelyn brewed fresh tea, the warmth filling the small cottage. For the first time in years, there were no secrets between them. No fear. No lies. When dawn came, Marco stood at the window watching the sea turn gold. "Funny thing about the ocean," he said. "You can drown in it or be reborn by it. Guess we did both." Evelyn joined him, resting her head on his shoulder. "So what now?" He smiled faintly. "Now we live. Maybe even for real this time." Outside, the waves crashed softly against the rocks, carrying away the last echoes of the Cross Empire. The ghosts had finally stopped whispering, and for the first time, Evelyn didn't look back. A year later, the sea was calm again. The world had moved on, but on a quiet stretch of coast in southern France, Evelyn Cross stood barefoot in the sand, watching the sunrise bleed gold across the horizon. The waves whispered softly at her feet, each one carrying pieces of the past. Grief, fire, forgiveness. Behind her, laughter rang out. A little boy toddled toward her, his curls the same shade as Richard's once were, but his eyes, those deep blue eyes, were hers. She scooped him up, smiling through tears she didn't bother to hide. "Easy, Luca," she whispered. "The sea's gentle today, but she's never to be trusted." From the porch, Marco leaned against the railing, a faint grin tugging at his scarred face. "He's got your stubborn streak," he said. Evelyn smirked. "No, he's got yours." They shared a look that carried years of loss and something stronger, peace. Marco had stayed, helping her build the Crosswave Initiative into an international foundation. What began as vengeance had become something sacred. Schools were rebuilt, shelters were opened. Women who once hid in the shadows now ran companies, farms, entire lives. But Evelyn knew the truth. Peace wasn't a reward, it was a choice. Every morning she chose it again, even when the ghosts tried to whisper back. That day, a visitor arrived. A young journalist, barely 30, nervously stepped out of a car, clutching a recorder. "Mrs. Cross?" she asked softly. "Thank you for meeting with me." Evelyn smiled. "Please, just Evelyn." They sat on the porch, tea steaming between them. The journalist hesitated before pressing record. "You changed the world, Evelyn. You exposed one of the largest corruption networks in history. People call you a hero. But How did you survive all that pain? Evelyn looked out toward the sea, the sunlight catching the blue crystal at her neck, the same necklace that had once saved her life. By remembering that pain doesn't have to end you, it can begin you. The journalist leaned forward. Do you ever think about him? Your husband? She took a long breath. Sometimes, not with hate anymore, just pity. He died chasing everything that never mattered. Power, money, control, they all vanish. Love doesn't. And Marco? Evelyn smiled gently. He's my brother, my compass. The world tried to make us enemies, but blood found its way back through fire. The journalist nodded, visibly moved. And your son, what will you tell him when he's older? Evelyn looked down at little Luca, now chasing a seagull along the shore, laughing as it lifted into the sky. I'll tell him that his father lost everything trying to own the world, and his mother found everything by letting it go. The journalist sat in silence for a moment before turning off the recorder. Thank you, she said softly. As the car disappeared down the road, Marco joined Evelyn on the porch. You did good, sis, he said, lighting a cigarette. She nudged him playfully. Thought you quit. I quit dying, not smoking, he said with a grin. They laughed together, the sound warm and free. Evelyn turned her gaze back to the sea. The waves sparkled like glass, and for the first time in her life, they didn't scare her. She whispered to the wind, It's over, Mama. We made it. The breeze lifted her hair, carrying her words out over the water. Somewhere in the distance, a single gull cried, sharp, bright, alive. And as the sun climbed higher, Evelyn Cross finally understood what all the storms had been trying to tell her. Survival wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of her peace. So that's how the story ends. But if you're still here, right now, listening, maybe something in this journey touched your heart, even just a little. Evelyn's story wasn't only about betrayal or revenge. It was about healing, about remembering that even after the darkest storms, the sun always returns. Marcus Aurelius once said, You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. That's what Evelyn learned. The same lesson we all eventually face. Life will break you, but it's up to you to decide what those broken pieces become. Anger or wisdom? Pain or peace? Maybe you've been through your own fire. Maybe you felt like you were drowning in it. But remember, like Evelyn, you can rise again. Healing isn't forgetting. It's forgiving yourself for surviving. If this story reminded you of something real in your own life, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs a bit of strength tonight, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because sometimes the stories we hear aren't just about others. They're about finding the courage to rewrite our own.